Hey Soma, I thought I'd introduce you to 2023, the year of living in the story. The story of God is huge from Genesis to Revelation. Actually, it starts before Genesis and continues after Revelation. It's an eternal story that God is telling about himself. At Soma, we believe in the importance of stories. Story is one of the ways we make meaning as human beings, and we are created to be story makers and storytellers and to live within a story because God created us within the story that He is telling. And so we hope in 2023 it'll be the year of living in the story, telling the story, encouraging one another to experience the story in its fullness. And the story starts with creation, and then we have the terrible moment of the fall of humanity in Genesis 3. And then there's this ongoing story of how God is redeeming the world. Life gets redeemed, meaning gets put back into a meaningless existence, and the story climaxes with Jesus and the redemption He brings, and the new creation to come, a final remaking, a final rejusticing of every injustice, a final wiping away of every tear that we've shed. And being invited into this story has one profound impact on us. We find our identity and meaning, not in what we do, but in what He has done. Jesus is the one who was successful. That's the story. He's the hero, and we're invited into His story. And if you've grown up in church culture when you were little, someone might have asked you to invite Jesus into your heart, and I certainly did that, and that's fantastic. But it's interesting because it can make it seem that our heart and our story and our life is the big entity, and Jesus kind of gets fit into that, rather than that Jesus is the big entity. It's His story that's the big story. Father, Son and Holy Spirit are telling this massive eternal story that we are invited up into. And the magnificence of that is, it isn't like I hope that God will give me some meaning in my story. It's that I'm invited up into ultimate meaning, into the ultimate story, and into ultimate reality. That's what we've been invited into, and it changes profoundly every moment that we participate in it. The problem is that the story is now and not yet, and there's a part of the story that hasn't happened. There's a part that's happening, there's a part that has happened, and there's a part that will happen. And we have a tendency to see all the ways the world is not yet. It's not yet in its government, it's not yet in its economy, it's not yet in its justice, it's not yet even in the way we treat one another in our families. It's just not yet. And after living in that not yet, day after day, moment after moment, we can begin to think that the not yet to come isn't reality. But it is. It's just that it's not yet. And yes, we are still in this fallen world, and there are realities about that, aloneness, woundedness, oppression. These things are not yet redeemed. But rather than seeing that that is our identity, we need to build a story of God identity, putting ourselves into His story rather than asking God to come into our story. That He is the one who gets to script it. And that's what we're invited into, the story that He is telling. And yeah, we're still in this fallen world, but let's not be robbed of the wonder and the magnificence of being part of His story and the great meaning and great significance that we have because of that. And that we get to enjoy His presence in our life, and that we are new creations already. So yeah, lots to unpack about what it means to be in the story of God, but we're going to look at Genesis, God's story from creation and new creation. We're going to look at Isaiah 40 to 55, the Messiah in God's story, and we're going to look at 1 Corinthians, the church in God's story. And along the way, we're going to understand our personal stories in the context of God's stories, and we'll learn how the story of God both critiques and completes our cultural stories. So it's all going to be great. Can't wait.